Welcome to this talk about barriers in everyday life. We have four layers in accessibility, and accessibility only works when these four layers come together. The operating system, that means, for example, Windows, iOS, Android, or Mac, provides a way in which accessibility information can be placed. For example, this is called the accessibility API. The next thing is that the program or client, for example, Microsoft Word, Mozilla Firefox, or whatever, can work with this information. Then the next thing is that the document or website or PDF or whatever is also based on this accessibility information. And the last thing is that the accessibility, the assistive technology can work with this information. That means that it is possible to read headings or interpret alternative text which are provided via the document or PDF or website or whatever. There are different ways how to deal with barriers. The first thing is adjustments. That means that you adjust, for example, the colors on your operating system, PC, or smartphone to make it easier to recognize elements on the screen. Another thing is our dedicated assistive technologies. That means technologies which are made for people with disabilities so that they can use computers, for example, the screen reader or speech input, speech control, whatever. And one important thing is also that you develop strategies um, to convey to cope with barriers which you see in the web. For example, if you use headings for navigating through a page, this is a strategy, and that is very important when you are, for example, blind or motor disabled. We can distinguish between three kinds of disabilities: sensory and physical disabilities, for example, blindness or motor disability; perceiving or processing information, for example, um, cognitive disabilities. And the third thing are limited abilities in using technology or reading. Let's start with sensory and physical disabilities. One important disability is visual disabilities, visual impairments. That means, for example, that you cannot see things good, or that you have problems with low contrast. And this is in the situation you use, for example, um, adjustments in the operating system, or you use um, Zoom or other things to make it easier to recognize things. Another thing is blindness. When you are blind, of course, you cannot see the visual interface, and you need informations like headings, heading structure, or what should I write into this input field, or alternative text. When you are blind, you in most cases you use a screen reader, which puts out information in voice or braille. Uh, and you need, of course, the accessibility information, which I already mentioned. Another thing is deafness. When you are deaf, you cannot hear Voices, for example, then you need subtitles or captions. Um, Another case is when you didn't learn the verbal language of speaking people, then you need also sign language because you cannot read and write usual text. Another thing are motor disabilities. When you have a motor disability with your hands or arms, you cannot use a mouse or keyboard, and then you use, for example, speech input to use your computer. Let's take a look on cognitive disabilities. One famous thing is learning disabilities, for example, Down syndrome. Um, People who has this disability have problems um, to interact with complex user interfaces, and they also need, in many cases, easier understandable language, for example, plain language. Then there are seizure disorders. This means, for example, when you have epilepsy, you can get seizures when you have special effects like flashing or flickering. Another kind of disability is autism. When you have autism, it is difficult for you to ignore such effects. That means it can trigger you and can bring you to leave the page or the app. That can be sounds, that can be graphical effects and other things. Another thing which is much broader is understanding and remembering information. Can be different things like dementia, um, when older people have problems to remember things they have read or saw in a video. Another thing are people with classical reading disabilities like dyslexia. They have problems to read text and pull out the relevant information from text. Then there are some other impairments. One important thing is reading. Many people with no disability, it's not a disability, but they have problems with reading text, for example, because they didn't learn it. And that's very difficult because many or most information in the web are provided via text. Another thing is that you can have low affinity to technology. That means that you perhaps can use a smartphone, writing WhatsApp messages or things like that, or scroll through a page. But perhaps you don't have the ability to make more complex things like filling out a form or ordering things in the online store. Then there are some combinations of disabilities which we should talk about. And one thing is late disabled. Late means is a older age. When you are young, it is much easier, or born disabled, it's much easier to adjust to the disability. It makes it much easier. And the older you get, it is more difficult to cope with the disability. It makes it much easier, more difficult, for example, to use a screen reader was when you usually worked with as a sighted person. Another thing is people with multiple disabilities. That means more than two or more disabilities. That also makes it more difficult to work with technology. For example, when you are deaf and blind, it's of course much more difficult to use a computer or smartphone. There's only one way, Braille, and that is also true for many other disabilities. Another problem can be age. When you are older, of course, you have many problems with seeing, hearing, moving, and your memory. And that makes it much more difficult to cope with technology. Perhaps you don't have also don't have much experience with technologies, that you don't have a social network who somebody who is supporting you in using the technology, and that makes it much more difficult to use technology. So I hope that you find that talk very helpful and would be glad if you subscribe to this channel. Goodbye.